Greetings, friends. I'm with one of our great friends in Healthcare Revenue Cycle Community, Chris Johnson. Chris,
Good morning,
good
Gina.
morning.
Again, thanks for the invitation and the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll just dive in with the title. Where are you at, and what's your official title right now?
So, great question. Official title today is Vice President of Patient Account Services and Vendor Management for Advocate Health. So, I'll give you a little more detail so you can kind of make sure we understand what that does. So Advocate Health is now a combination of Advocate Aurora in the Midwest, which is in the states of Wisconsin and Illinois, and Atrium Health, which is based in Charlotte and encompasses North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. December of 2024 actually comes 2 years or marks 2 years of this merger. The parent organization now is Advocate Health. So we have a lot of A's floating
A
around,
lot
right? We
of
have
A's,
Advocate
yes.
Healthcare in the Midwest, we had Aurora Healthcare in the Midwest, we have Atrium Health in the Southeast. The parent company adopted Advocate Health,
Okay.
not Advocate Healthcare, Advocate Health. Interestingly, the headquarters is in Charlotte for the new combined organization. And so because now of the size of the organization, we have a senior VP, Chief Revenue Cycle Officer that resides in the Midwest. So our
Okay.
our senior leader actually is Legacy Midwest. And when she stepped in, she divided the revenue cycle operation by function. Maybe I won't say service line, really more by function, and
Okay.
determined very quickly my VPs are going to operate at an enterprise level, right? So we don't have a Southeast VP or something and a Midwest VP in revenue cycle space. If you have an area, you own it. So for example, I own customer service for the entire enterprise. I own correspondence for the entire enterprise, both patient correspondence and insurance correspondence. The self-pay AR is my area of responsibility. And then what has consumed more of my time than I ever anticipated is the vendor management business partner relationships with our revenue cycle vendors, which across the two organizations it is in excess of 100 partners that we
Wow.
work with doing various add-on pieces of revenue cycle. So historically, we're in a smaller organization. Each of us, myself included, may have had broader responsibility with having own pieces, billing, follow up. Actually, in my career path, I've never had responsibility for HIM and the coding component, and I'm very
Okay.
thankful for that. I've never had that responsibility. But every other component, patient access, billing, follow up, all the things, revenue integrity, and so forth, over the years, depending on the organization, I've had responsibility for pieces of that at various times. In this new structure with this much larger organization, we've become very specific in our roles. And I don't want to use the word siloed because that doesn't work and
Right.
that's not the way we operate. But we have a much deeper scope, even if it's more narrow, if that makes sense.
Yes. No, it does make sense. So, with that explanation, how did you get into healthcare revenue cycle management?
Yeah, well, so I'm not going to give you the whole life story
Okay. All
because
right.
at this point, sad to say, I think of this often now, that encompasses like 40, let's just leave it at that.
Yes, we'll just,
Okay,
yeah.
years of experience. Let's just put it
Or
that
the
way.
wisdom. Yes.
So interestingly enough, it's funny. I was talking with the group the other day and we were talking about this. And so I said to the group, raise your hand of the number of people who said, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a revenue cycle person.
Hmm.
You'll not be surprised nobody raised their hand, right? And I'm
Right.
certainly not one of those people. I never had a thought path of, oh, I'm going to go into revenue cycle management. And quite frankly, you will remember this when I started doing this many, many,
Hmm.
many years ago, the revenue cycle wasn't even a term,
It
right?
was
We didn't,
not.
we didn't
Correct.
call it revenue cycle.
Right.
So here's how I landed, or here's how I got started. I was 18 years old. I had a part-time job. I was broke, and I needed more money.
Right.
Where I grew up, small community in that day and age, the hospital was always a safe place to work,
Hmm.
right? From a career or from an employment. So I wouldn't even say from a career, from an employment standpoint. The mindset in the small community was, well, you can work at the hospital and you can work forever, right?
Right.
Like you can go there. So when I went there, it wasn't my goal to work there forever. It was just honestly, as an 18-year-old, it was my goal to make more money.
Hmm.
So I interviewed with the business office manager, I guess revenue cycle leader at that point in time. And I do remember to this day something that she said to me in the interview process. She said, I typically find people that come to work at the hospital, one of two things happens. They fall in love with the environment and they stay, and that is what they do.
Mhm.
Or they very quickly decide this is not for me and they go find something else to do. I found that to be true over the years, and I actually fell in love with the hospital environment. Thought, this is something that I can do. So I'm thinking back on that. I started in the emergency room doing registration on third shift. At that point, we registered the patients, and at midnight, we became the switchboard operators. This was before HIPAA existed. Patients, they rolled the patients through the ER door on the stretcher. I sat
Yep.
at a desk with a typewriter in the
Mhm.
middle of a hall, and we asked them all the questions that today people would have a heart attack if we asked those questions in public, right? So it's a
Absolutely.
very, very different time. So that started my journey in that. So I grew up in a small town. I mean, I grew up in Scotland County, Warrenburg, North Carolina. I may or may not know where that's at, but again, it's a little dot on the map that you
Yeah.
don't go unless you happen to be from there, right? I had an opportunity a couple years later to move to a higher level position in at what was then Cape Fear Medical in Wilmington.
Okay.
Did that for a while. Then opportunities just presented. So along that track, I went from Cape Fear Medical in Wilmington to Johnson Memorial in Smithfield, from Johnson Memorial to Duke University Medical Center. I think I was about 26 years old when I went to work at Duke University. Duke is a well-known institution, as you know. And so at that point, I thought, okay, I have arrived, right? This is where I will be. I love this job. I'm going to do this until I retire. Um,
Right.
Children and the Lord have a way of changing your
They
plan,
do. They
right?
do. Yes.
And so as my boys, we had children, as the boys were starting to grow up, I thought, you know, I like the small town environment and I want my
Mhm.
children to grow up in a small town. And so they did, because we picked up and we moved to a town in the foothills of the North Carolina Mountains called Rutherfordton. It's a mouthful, but much like Laurinburg, you
Mhm.
don't end up here unless you have really good reasons. Not like,
Right.
people don't just show up here and think, oh, I always wanted to visit. So it's a small town. People, I often say to people, oh, we kind of live in Mayberry. So our boys grew up here, now have been here for 31 years. I came to work. I mean, we moved here because I came to work in the hospital. Again, small town, community hospital, great environment. To this day, I love the community hospital environment.
Me too. I
But
do
our
too.
industry has changed, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
There are not many independent small town community hospitals left, if any. And I'm not sure there are any, but if there are very few, they've all become parts of larger organizations. So somewhere in the time span, after about 5 years, I actually got an opportunity. Somebody reached out to me about going to work with what at that time was Carolina's healthcare system in Charlotte.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I was like, well, that sounds like a great opportunity, but I have no desire to live in Charlotte. So, I'm not moving. Um, and I remember, again, some things you just remember, like Keystone, and the answer was, well, you don't have to move to Charlotte. Like, you can live where you live, because we want you to do work with our what we refer to as regional facilities. And I thought, well, that's a great opportunity. So took him up on that offer. Shocker, 8 months later, I ended up in Charlotte, which was where I said, no, I'm not going to do this.
Right.
But over the course, so I have now been with Atrium, now Advocate.
Hmm.
This is my 27th year. In the
Oh,
course of that time, I did go out into the field, work with our regional facilities, came back in when we decided to make the move to Epic. So I worked in Charlotte for several years. We went from Carolina's healthcare system to Atrium Health to now Advocate Health. It's been a great journey. It is not a career that I picked, right?
hmm.
It's almost more
Hmm.
like it picked me.
Right.
I stepped through the door, and then the door just kept opening. And again, it's. I mean, I have no complaint. I really have had a great career. I've gotten to, I say this often when I'm talking to people. If you have known me, like when I was 18 years old, I was a shy, introverted person who truly believed I would live in the same community my entire life. Right? I
Mhm.
never had any aspiration to move. So if someone had said to me at that point in time, somewhere in your life journey, you will become a member of a professional organization like HFMA.
Hmm.
And in the course of that journey, you'll go through the officer chairs with the chapter.
Hmm.
And at some point, you'll get involved with HFMA on a national level. And you'll have the opportunity to travel and meet people all across the country, build relationships, establish friendships. I would have said, you are out of your mind. Like,
Hmm.
there's no way that's ever going to happen. The shocker of all of that is I have had those opportunities, so many of them. And while people don't believe this now, the truth of the matter is, at my core, I am still that introverted, shy person. There's a persona that you have to develop to do what you do, right?
Hmm.
So there
Hmm.
are things, if you're going to do well in the industry, you learn to do. At the core, that small town boy hasn't really changed a lot. So
Kind of like giving us your minutes for this interview. You know, Jenna, there are far better people to talk to. No,
yeah, I would still agree with that statement.
I love
I,
that.
I
But
don't I don't find my life story, quite honestly, all that interesting to other people, right? I just think there are people whose journey probably is much more entertaining or interesting or some other factor.
I think, though, if we took a roll of your folks that you have worked with, and we always say, people that have worked for you, they haven't worked for you, they've worked with you. I
Yes,
think they would probably beg to differ. So,
I hope so.
yeah, I absolutely know. So let's talk about the role of our RCM community and the reaching out. We're really focused at RCR Hub to make sure that these connections stay, that we're a cohesive group, that we're supporting one another, and our providers and business partners are like, just a quick minute. I know that you mentioned HFMA. Anything you'd like to say about our RCM community? And now that you're with the vendor management portion of it, you can really speak to that. So,
Yes, so it's a close-knit community, much more so than people might think. Over these many years, especially with the business partners or the vendors or how, whichever
yeah, whatever
you
you want to call
use
it.
for that.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's interesting when you're on the provider side, as I've been, and I've always been on the provider side,
Okay.
right? I've
Right.
never been on the vendor side. It's kind of like when I stepped into it, back to the first statement, my first boss said, you'll either love it or you won't.
Right. Right.
And it's a kind of stayed the course there. What I've learned over this many years is there are a lot of vendors and companies that truly are lifelong friends at
Hmm.
this point.
Hmm.
And you have to, as a provider, you have to be careful about that because there's the friendship, right, in some
Right.
cases, and then there's the business. And so you have to know what your responsibilities are, and you kind of have to keep that in track. But there are within our community, and I really like the word that you use there because it really is a community. There are people that I've now known and connected with the 25 plus, maybe even more
Hmm.
years. Um, one of the things that at our annual meeting, the North Carolina HFMA chapter, which is, again, our members are made up of both providers and non-providers,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And those people over the years have served in various and sundry leadership roles. And so at that annual meeting, we kind of bring all of the past presidents together. And what's often said as people reflect or like, what was your year, et cetera, what's often reflected there is the friendship. Like that community it really becomes another family.
Hmm.
And what I've often said at that meeting is there are a lot of people that I work with in this space in the revenue cycle community. In some cases they're almost closer than my family, and I end up talking to some of them more than I actually do some of my family members. I'll just give you a really good example of that. The recent storm that came through Western North Carolina, and kind of I think if you watch the news at all, you're probably familiar with the devastation that came along with that. I was touched and somewhat overwhelmed by the number of people who reached out to say, "Hey, are you okay?
Hmm.
Like, what, do you need anything? What can we do to help?" I mean, fortunately for me personally and my family, we were fine and we were
Right.
spared any of that major, devastation. But it was that community is as I watched and just thought, if and I'm sure it wasn't just me. That's my point. I mean,
Right.
that
Right.
community of people was reaching out to across the entire state of North Carolina to people that we know and that they felt might have been impacted. So again, I think it's been a significant part of my career journey as
Agree.
that community has grown. And again, I there's so many people that I look at as the extended family. Or if you don't, you don't have the family feel, you have the context. Like none of us have the corner on expertise or knowledge, right?
Right.
So if I have a question, I mean, Keith is a perfect example, right? I mean, not long ago I had a question about how does this work, or what are you doing, or what are you seeing?
Hmm.
You feel very comfortable shooting an email, picking up the phone, and saying, "Hey, I need help with this," or give me your perspective of what you're seeing. Um, it's just a network that we've built that provides tremendous support, both personally and professionally.
I agree. I agree. And I think that's why the innovation hubs, Chris, and the provider peer groups and all of those things work. I don't have time to see that new AI
Yeah.
device in coding or whatever that may be. But if you've used it, or if you can give me insight, or Epic installs are a big one as well. So that community, I just think it's so powerful.
And
And I
I
think it's
agree.
something we cannot lose. We cannot lose. So we
What
tell
I
stories.
Yeah, 100% agree. And to your comment about that community and the space, like AI is a really good example because,
Mhm.
again, we all get, so a new technology hits our industry and like all of
Right.
a sudden it's everywhere and, everybody has it and so forth. So we as leaders have to dig through like the headline and then really
Right.
get down to, okay,
Right.
what's the reality? Part of that is being able to call members of that group, that revenue cycle community,
Mhm.
and say, okay, what do you know about this?
Right.
Or did this really work? Or even more so, the part I love is when I'm able to call people and say, tell me how to avoid not making some of the same mistakes that might have been made earlier. And what's really interesting about that is we as a community are always very willing to do that. Like I've never called a peer or reached out a peer of mine and said, "Oh, I can't share like what went well or what didn't go well. You just kind of have to figure that out on your own."
Right.
That has never happened. It's sure, let me tell you what we did. Let me tell you what worked well. Let me tell you some things that might save you some time that you don't want to do.
Right.
I mean, I think that's unique.
I do too. I agree. And it's never it's
Isn't it?
never a character, it's never a character assassination or buildup. It's
Right.
never those things. But one thing everybody gets on me, Chris, they're like, well, you don't tape it, you don't record it. When you have these peer group things, well, if we did that, could everybody really share?
No.
No. I mean, it's part of this community that we tell the truth, and we're not negative in the fact that this is what we had, this is what we found, and this was our resolve, or this is, where we went. So
Oh,
it's
and I 100% agree with you. And that is where you get some honest feedback.
great.
That you have a group of peers that want to have an open conversation and be able to share the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Exactly.
and know that you're going to learn from each other, which is the whole intent. Like, how do I help somebody else?
Right.
Which, again, to me has been a constant theme of my career as I've
Hmm.
gone through. There have been so many people who offered a hand to me that have
Hmm.
made that journey easier. I mean, I think that's what we do.
Yeah, that is what we do at RCR Hub. We step up this way. So let's talk about your charities and about your Thanksgiving and about your November leading into the holidays. I know that charities are a big part of your heart as well, and so I'll let you lead.
This is kind of my take on charities. There are so many needs across not just the United States, but quite frankly worldwide. And I kind of look at it like this. In the course of my lifetime, I often try to figure out like why have I been so blessed, right?
Mm,
Clearly not because it's deserved, and again, we've had our normal share of lifetime things that you go through, right?
sure.
But on par, quite frankly, my life's been relatively easy. I clearly have never experienced some of the things that a lot of the world's population does, as far as housing and hunger and those kind of things.
Mhm.
So that puts in my mind I think the message that comes from Scripture that to whom much is given, much is required, right?
Mm.
If you can share, you should share. And so that kind of then would roll into I don't think anybody can do everything. You know, there are people, obviously like Mother Teresa, Billy Graham, and so that changed the whole world, right?
Yeah, they did.
That's never going to happen in Chris Johnson's life. Like nobody's ever going to think, wow, Chris Johnson changed the whole world. Okay, that's not going to happen. But I am convinced, and I share this with my team a lot as we talk about, volunteer projects and things you can do. I am convinced that if I can help one person,
Mhm.
and that person helps another person and they help another person, then eventually we may in fact change the whole world. Not
Mhm.
me, but a collective group of people. So, in my case, I really chose, and there are a couple things that are really important to me. Housing is one, because I think a safe place to live just makes for a better life. And I think tons and tons of studies show that if you have a safe or a good home environment, then you do so much better in every field, like in
Mhm.
education and health and so on and so on. So I've done a lot of work historically with Habitat for Humanity, which I
Mhm.
think is a phenomenal organization, and I think they have a great mission, like to
I
provide
agree.
homes for people that don't have one. Samaritan's Purse is another organization that I got connected with a few years ago because something else that's really dear, close to my heart is disaster relief. Because
Mhm.
in the case of a disaster, people have a normal life. They're going about their day-to-day routine, and then something happens that completely turns the world upside down that they had no control over,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so all of a sudden life is good, and then the next day life is not so good.
Mhm.
And so I really have a desire to help people recover. And so Samaritan's Purse, I mean, that is a huge part of
Mhm.
their mission. So a few years ago, actually, Debbie and I connected with them. That came, I don't know if you remember when the tornadoes came through Mayfield, Kentucky,
Yep.
and like basically leveled the town.
Yeah.
We said, we should go there and help. And
Right.
that kind of started, that piece of it. So I got connected with Samaritan's Purse, which I think is a great organization, very organized, very accountable for what they do with
Mhm.
the money that's given to them. And so, interestingly enough, as we talk about like where our careers are going to take us, I connected with a gentleman who said, you really seem like you have a heart for this. And I said, well, I do, but I also have this thing called a job, right? And then, of course, through the church that I attend, we do some mission work in South
Mhm.
Africa with an organization called the Door of Hope.
Okay.
It's another great organization in the sense that in that area, there's just a lot. There's a real issue with people who have children that they can't take care of, especially as
Mhm.
babies. And so, in South Africa, in this community, they have the drawer, like the drawer is in a wall. That's why it's called Door of Hope. You actually, so mothers who like have a baby think, there's no way I can ever care for this child, and I want it to have a chance, right?
Right.
They can take the baby, put them in the box, and then when it closes, it's locked. And then somebody inside of the orphanage knows that there's a baby in the box, and they go, retrieve it and bring it into the orphanage and then take care of it. And there's no questions asked, right? So like,
Right.
but the mother's not okay. What happened or why? It's a way to say, I can't give this child what I think they need,
Mhm.
but I want them to have a chance. So we do that. We've done that for the last couple of years. We're planning to go back in 2025.
Nice.
And so that's kind of where I put my time when I have spare time
Right.
from the charity standpoint. I think the need is great.
I agree.
I mean, that's just three examples, but between the two of us, I'm sure we could rattle off 100 different needs.
Yeah.
So I would say find your place, find what you feel passionate about, but I truly believe every single one of us should at least feel some obligation to give back.
I agree. I agree. Well, Chris, always a delight. Great to see you. I just thank you. I know we referred to this a few times, out of the comfort zone, but I sure appreciate you. And like I said, when we talked about November and charity, there's one person that came to mind, and it was you. So I've been hounding you for several months. So thank you for taking the time. I know you're busy, so
Was glad to do it,
I
and I appreciate
appreciate
you
you.
thinking of me. But again, that is very humbling. And
Mm.
again, I don't. There are more people that do a lot more than I do. I just want to be clear about that. I mean, I
Absolutely.
want to contribute, but there are people that that make me look clearly like an amateur. But I appreciate your time. Appreciate you considering me. It's really quite an honor, Gina, to
So,
be honest with you.
well, thank you, friend.